Hi, this is Dr. Gregory Sadler. I'm a professor of philosophy and the president and founder of an educational consulting company called Reason.io, where we put philosophy into practice. I've studied and taught philosophy for over 20 years, and I find that many people run into difficulties reading classic philosophical texts. Sometimes it's the way things are said or how the text is structured. But the concepts themselves are not always that complicated, and that's where I come in. To help students and lifelong learners, I've been producing longer lecture videos and posting them to YouTube. Many viewers say they find them useful. What you're currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each of them focused on one core concept from an important philosophical text. I hope you find it useful as well. One particularly interesting index that Plutarch is going to discuss in his treatise on how a person can become aware of their progress in virtue is what happens to us when we go to sleep. And he actually at one point says when we're dreaming, or also when we're sick, when we have a nosos, an illness. So when we're not in our normal capacities, where, as he's going to point out, a lot of people are more or less held back out of worries about what other people will think or about the law and fear and shame and things like that. So what do we actually dream about? And so he brings up Zeno first. Zeno is the founder of the Stoic school, and he says something that doesn't completely fit necessarily with what Zeno probably would have said, but here's what he says. Every person can derive from their dreams a awareness, a consciousness that they are making progress if they observe that during this period of sleep, they don't feel pleasure in anything that is disgraceful or shameful, and they don't tolerate, so they don't put up with or commit any dreadful or untoward action, but, he says, as though in the clear depth of an absolute calm there came over him the radiant thought, now here's the upshot, that the fanciful, the fantastike, that's actually the word we get fancy from, and the emotional, the pathetikon element in his soul had been, it's translated here as dispelled by reason, and the Greek there is diakehumenon, and dispelled can work for that. It's got a sense of pouring out, of changing the ways in which liquid is being poured, and then later on it does have the sense of making something go away. Now, would Zeno actually say that reason, the rational part, gets rid of the emotional part? No, because it's actually in the rational part that emotions are felt, according to Stoics. Nor would he probably get rid of the fanciful part, the part that has fantasiae, because the Stoics think that we're always working with appearances. So there must be something else going on here, but it's enough to say Zeno thinks that there's going to be a clear subordination of the parts of us that get the appearances and then have emotional responses to them. So that would actually fit quite well there. And because of that, in our dreams, we're not going to be doing bad stuff, right? Motivated by those emotions or appearances. And then he goes on to talk about Plato, and he says, even earlier Plato, and this is in, for example, the Republic and other places as well, Plato gave form and expression to the operations of the fanciful, again, the fantastikon element, but now he says the irrational, the alogon element. And this is really the same sort of thing. The ancient Greek philosophers like Plato and Aristotle would divide the soul into the rational part and then the irrational part or parts, which were also emotional parts, right? So this is, more or less along the same lines. And he says that in a naturally bad person, a despotic person, during sleep, it's going to do all sorts of bad stuff. And he gives examples. It attempts incest, big problem there. It feels a sudden hunger for a great variety of food. It acts in a lawless or going against the laws, paranomon fashion, and gives loose rein to the desires which in the daytime the law keeps confined. So when you're sleeping, when you're dreaming, you can do all the things that you're not supposed to do and you would get punished for, right? So in a bad person, this is what happens, according to Plato. And then Plutarch is going to suggest that doesn't have to be the case for all of us. So he uses this metaphor of a well-trained beast of burden. So think about, a horse or an oxen, and you've got a wagon, and if you let go of the reins, will it continue on its course? Or if you let go of the reins, is it going to do whatever it wants? It's going to go somewhere else. Well, if it's actually been well-trained, if it's been conditioned properly, then it will go along the path as it's supposed to. And so he says, this is the way it is in people in whom the irrational part, the irrational impulse, has already been rendered obedient, listening to, literally, it listens to reason, and gentle, and praus, doesn't get angry, and this has happened by reason. Reason tells it what to do, and it follows it. But there's more to the story than just reason getting things right. There's some training, some conditioning that has to be required. And then what will happen is in dreams and illnesses, it will actually follow the course that it should. It will, instead of being moved by the appetites, the epithumia, which is an important part of the soul for Plato, it won't be engaging in what's translated here as arrogance, really hubris, right? Hubridzēn in Greek. And it won't be doing things that are against the law, paranomon. It won't be engaging in lawlessness. So it won't be doing that in its dream. And then he goes on and he says, you can train your body not to be affected by certain things. And he's going to give examples here. The heart, you can, slow your heartbeat down in the midst of scary things. You can make the eyes refrain from tears at a piteous sight. So you can make the body obedient to you. Well, you can do that with the emotions as well. So he says you can make the passions chastely remain unexcited and undisturbed in the presence of youthful or maidenly beauty. So you see an attractive person, you don't get automatically turned on, right? Let alone go pursue them or anything like that, which is what's probably going to happen in your dreams if you don't train yourself. And so he says that if we use this training, ascesis, doing things over and over again, deliberately, this is how reason trains the passions, then when we're sleeping, we are going to do away, as he says, with the irregularities and vagaries of our fancies and incitements, and we'll have dreams that are pretty good. And he brings up the example of Stilpo, who was a famously self-controlled philosopher from Megara. He dreams that Poseidon comes to him, and Poseidon is mad at him, saying, "Why aren't you sacrificing properly to me?" And Stilpo says, "You want me to spend a lot of money on sacrificing a bull? How about I just, sacrifice what's actually within my means?" And Poseidon says, "Okay, that's cool." So he's got a good dream. And this becomes an index for us. If we have untroubled dreams that we can recall, that is a sign that we're actually making progress in a moral sense, because what we're doing is we're conditioning our responses, our emotions, the way in which we take in appearances. On the other hand, if, like he says, torturing memories, so, thinking about the bad stuff that we did, perturbations, being shaken by stuff, ignoble desertions, abandoning our duties, childish transports of joy and sorrow, such as those experienced in dismal or abnormal dreams, these are a sign that we're not doing well. And they're also a sign that what's actually shaping us. And it's interesting here because the Greek term that is used for shaping our soul in this case is the word that we actually get plastic from, plachomenes, right? What's forming us is our opinions, being worried about what other people think, our reputation, and the laws. And how do the laws work? Well, the laws make us feel ashamed or afraid. So what happens when you take those away? When you retreat into your mind and the law can't touch you anymore, and other people don't know what's actually happening in your sleep, so you don't have to worry about their opinions, well, then you go hog wild and you do all sorts of stuff that you shouldn't do, and your emotional aspects are going to run the show. Right? So he says there's influences by the emotions, and those could be anger, those could be sexual desire, those could be rivalry, those could be pick whatever you want, right? But it won't be subject to reason. So according to Plutarch, we can actually use what it is that we're dreaming about, because when we're dreaming, we're bringing the soul or psyche that we have into that dream world. We can look at the way in which we dream, and we can say, am I actually making progress towards being a good person? Or is my dreamland where I do all the stuff, the bad stuff that I really want to do, but feel like I can't get away with in my waking life, in which case we're not making progress. So if if this psychology works, then this would in fact be a useful sign of whether a person is making progress or not.